The heat in Globe, Arizona, was always unfriendly, but on this morning it seemed especially relentless. Rachel Monroe felt sweat gathering on the back of her neck as she parked her shabby sedan at the curb. The two-story house in front of her didn't stand out from the others in this suburb. The same faded beige walls, the same small manicured lawn, the same shadows from the curtains on the windows. Only now there was yellow police tape flying, breaking the usual idyll. Rachel was 41, and she'd spent more than 20 of those years on the force. She'd begun her career as a patrol officer on the streets of Phoenix and had studied cruelty and suffering in all its forms before transferring to homicide. Her tall figure, wary gray eyes, and the wrinkles that appeared in the corners of her eyes when she frowned commanded the respect of even the most hardened criminals years of service had taught her to recognize lies before they rolled off her tongue, and that was her strength. "Detective, glad you could get here so quickly." She was greeted by a young patrolwoman at the entrance, whose face seemed inappropriately fresh for a crime scene. "Victims in the living room, first floor." Rachel nodded, pulling on her latex gloves. She took a deep breath before crossing the threshold, as she did before every new case. It was her ritual, her way of preparing herself for what awaited inside. The living room appeared tastefully furnished, but without much luxury. Bookshelves filled with old tomes took up the entire far wall. On each shelf were small statues and framed photographs. The coziness that had been lovingly created was now defiled by what lay on the floor by the coffee table. Ashley Hart, 35 years old, lay on her back, her dark hair strewn across the carpet. The 3 bullet holes in her chest hardly bled at all, but the pool of blood beneath her indicated that death had not been instantaneous. Her amber eyes remained open, a look of surprise in them, as if death had come as a surprise to her even as the bullets pierced her body. "Time of death?" Rachel asked the medical examiner who was already working on the body. "Preliminarily between 10 o'clock and midnight last night, but I can't say until we do a full autopsy." Rachel took several photos on her service phone, trying to capture every detail. The photos on the walls showed a life full of smiles, Ashley with a man, presumably David Hart, with the Grand Canyon as a backdrop. Ashley leaning over an old leather-bound book. Ashley with a dark-haired woman and 3 children at a picnic. "Where's the husband?" Rachel asked, not taking her eyes off the pictures. "Patrol found him at Jimmy's bar 4 blocks from here," one of the techs said. "Says he didn't kill her. They're taking him down to the station now. He's drunk and inebriated. Let him sit in a cell." Rachel nodded. "They always say they didn't do it, especially husbands." She walked around the living room, scrutinizing every detail. The books on the shelves were mostly old editions, classics, historical novels, a few works on paper restoration and conservation. On one of the tables lay an unfolded house catalog with folded pages and notes in the margins. "Had the neighbors heard anything?" Rachel asked, carefully flipping through the pages of the catalog. The family across the street said they heard a loud argument in the evening. The woman was yelling something like, "You have no right to decide this alone." The man was raising his voice too, but they couldn't make out the words. Rachel pressed her lips together. A typical family scene that escalated into tragedy, or something more complicated. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, where she found the couple's bedroom. The drawers of the dresser were pulled out, some things scattered on the floor, as if someone had searched for something in a hurry. On the bedside table on the side that, judging by the man's cologne, belonged to David, lay an open packet of blood pressure pills with a prescription for David Hart, written by Dr. Michael Parker only 3 days ago. In the bathroom, Rachel found 2 lockers, one with the usual supplies, the other locked with a small padlock. This locker piqued her professional curiosity, but she decided not to break into it yet, waiting for a warrant. Back downstairs, Rachel met a woman nervously shuffling from foot to foot at the entrance, talking to one of the patrolmen. "Detective Monroe," Rachel introduced herself as she stepped closer. "Bridget Foster," the woman replied in a shaky voice. Ashley was my best friend. We got word from the neighbors." Bridget looked weary, but not just from grief. The chronic fatigue of a mother of 3 was evident in her tired eyes. Her hair was in a careless bun. Her clothes were simple and functional. It was obvious that housework was taking up all her time. "Can we talk?" They settled on the porch of a neighboring house. away from prying eyes. Bridget fidgeted nervously with the hem of her blouse. "Did you know about the problems between Ashley and her husband?" Rachel asked. Bridget shook her head, but then shrugged. They were arguing about buying a new house. David wanted something cheaper, and Ashley insisted on a house with a good room for her work. She restored old books, was a real artist at it. Bridget smiled for a moment, remembering her friend, but the smile quickly disappeared. But I don't think it could have led to this. "What can you tell me about Ashley?" Bridget took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We've been friends since college. Ashley was always special, very talented, but also very private. She had a complicated past that she didn't like to talk about." Bridget was silent, as if weighing her next words. "Detective, there are things about Ashley that may have played a role in what happened." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "What things?" "I can't. It's not my secret to reveal. Not even now." Bridget shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "But if you find documents in her things, medical records, they might explain a lot." Rachel tried to decipher the mystery, but Bridget was clearly not going to say more. She only added, "Ashley was a wonderful person. She deserved to be happy, and she loved David." Back at the house, Rachel met another officer who was just about to find her. "Detective, we found a gun in the dumpster around the corner. .45 caliber. Looks like it was fired recently. Already sent it to forensics." Rachel nodded, making notes in her notebook. A gun so close to the crime scene. Either the killer had been very careless or wanted the weapon to be found. Evening was approaching, and with it, the end of her first day on the case. Rachel was on her way to the station to interview David Hart in person when her phone rang. "Detective Monroe," she answered. "Hello, Detective. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I work as a nurse at Dr. Parker's clinic." The voice on the other end of the line sounded uncertain. "I saw on the news about what happened to Ashley Hart, and, there's something you should know." Rachel was immediately alert. "I'm listening." "A few days ago, David Hart came to see Dr. Parker. It wasn't unusual. He's been seeing us for his blood pressure. But after their appointment, Dr. Parker was acting very strange. I could hear them talking. Not the conversation, but the tone. They've known each other since high school, and I've never heard Dr. Parker talk to David in such a worried tone." "Did you hear anything specific?" Rachel asked, feeling her hunting instincts kicking in. "No, but after Mr. Hart left, I saw Dr. Parker going through some medical records on the computer. He was very agitated. He came to work the next day with red eyes, like he'd been up all night." Rachel thanked the nurse for the information and asked her not to discuss it with anyone else. Putting the phone down, she looked again at the house that had been the center of someone's life until that morning and was now a crime scene. 3 key figures loomed in this puzzle. David Hart, a husband with a possible motive she had yet to learn about. Dr. Michael Parker, an old high school friend who might have known something important. And Ashley herself, whose life apparently contained a secret serious enough for someone determined to cut her off. Rachel Monroe sighed, knowing she had a long and difficult road ahead of her to uncover the truth behind this broken life. Dr. Parker's clinic was a single-story beige brick building surrounded by sparse palm trees that cast scant shade on the hot asphalt of the parking lot. Rachel stepped out of the car, feeling the globe air burning her skin even at this early hour. She caught the doctor looking over some paperwork. He looked up as she entered, and Rachel immediately noticed the tension behind the professional smile. Michael Parker was 53, but he was still strong, broad shoulders, confident in his movements, though the graying of his hair and the wrinkles around his eyes showed his age. "Detective Monroe." He held out his hand, which Rachel shook, noting a slight tremor. "I heard about what happened to Ashley. A terrible tragedy." They settled into his office. On the wall behind him hung photographs. A young Parker with a fishing rod, happily showing off his catch. A group photo of the high school graduating class, in which Rachel immediately noticed young David. Family portraits with his wife and children. "Dr. Parker, it has come to my attention that you have recently dated David Hart." Parker flinched, barely perceptibly, but it didn't escape Rachel's eyes. "Yeah, he's a patient of mine. Blood pressure problems, nothing unusual for his age. You were classmates? A slight smile touched Parker's lips. Yeah, we went to high school together. Then our paths diverged. I went into medicine. David was more into the practical stuff. Only started talking again when he moved to Globe a few years ago. Rachel tapped her pencil on her notebook. What did you talk about at the last appointment? Parker straightened, something in his gaze changing. I'm afraid that's privileged information protected by doctor-patient confidentiality. Dr. Parker, this is a murder investigation. That's why I have to be extra careful, he cut off. If you want medical information, get a warrant. Rachel studied his face. Something wasn't right here. It wasn't just about professional ethics. I'd been informed that you'd met with David Hart outside the clinic as well, the day before Ashley's death. That hit the mark. Parker flinched and looked away. We had a drink together, like old buddies. Talked about what? Parker went pale, nervously fumbling with the pens on the table. Old times, fishing, nothing much, lies. Rachel felt it with every cell in her body, an instinct honed by years of interrogation. But with no witnesses to this encounter, she couldn't push any harder yet. Dr. Parker, I've noticed you've been accessing the medical databases of various hospitals. It wasn't a question, and Parker realized it. He clasped his hands together in front of him, his knuckles turning white. I'm a doctor. I often have to consult patient histories. Including Ashley Hart? Fear flashed in his eyes for a moment, but he recovered quickly. Detective, I realize you're doing your job, but I cannot and will not violate the confidentiality of my patients or anyone else without a court order. He was scared, but determined. Rachel realized she couldn't get any further now. I'll be back, Dr. Parker, with a warrant. As she left the clinic, she spotted the nurse, Sarah Jenkins, who'd called her the day before. The woman gave her a quick nod, but avoided direct eye contact. Something important was lurking here, and Rachel intended to find out. Bridget Foster's house was in the same neighborhood as the Hart house, but it looked more settled. The toys in the yard, the children's drawings pasted on the windows testified to a bustling family life. Rachel rang the doorbell when she heard children's voices and hurried footsteps inside. Bridget opened the door holding a toddler about 2 years old. An older girl clung to her skirt, and from somewhere in the back of the house came the sound of a video game. Detective Monroe? Bridget looked tired but focused. Come on in. Sadie, honey, go play with your brother in his room, okay? They went into the kitchen, where Bridget poured them both coffee with trembling hands. I was up all night, she admitted. I've been thinking about Ashley and what happened, and what I have to tell you. Rachel waited, giving her time to collect her thoughts. Ashley and I met in college, Bridget began, stirring the sugar in her cup. But back then, her name wasn't the same back then. Ashley was... She hesitated, as if even now she couldn't get past the barrier of secrecy she'd probably promised to keep for years. Ashley was a transgender woman, Rachel said quietly, helping her. Bridget looked up at her in surprise, then nodded. Yes, when I met her, she was still Alan, and I can see from your face that you're not really surprised. I've only suspected so far. The files in her locked locker? Probably. She always kept some of her medical records separate. Bridget ran her hand over her face. I went through the whole transition process with her. It wasn't easy, but Ashley, she always knew exactly who she really was. When she completed her transition, it was like she was finally herself, you know? Rachel nodded, taking notes. Did David know? No. Bridget shook her head. Ashley met him a few years after she completed her transition. All her paperwork was already in her new name. She'd gone through all the operations. She wanted to tell him. She'd gotten up the nerve to tell him several times, but she was afraid of his reaction. David seemed progressive in conversation, but sometimes he'd say something that made her hesitate. What do you think happened? Bridget clasped her hands together nervously. I don't want to think that David might have. But a week ago, Ashley called me in a panic. She said that Dr. Parker had requested her complete medical records from the clinic where she'd been treated. She'd received an email notification. Ashley immediately realized that if Parker saw her story and transition paperwork, he might tell David, since they were old friends. Rachel felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. Bridget, when was the last time you spoke to Ashley? The day before it happened, she seemed calmer, said maybe it was time to tell David on her own, in her own way. She believed their love was stronger than prejudice. Bridget's voice trembled. I should have been there for her, to support her. Rachel put her hand gently on her shoulder. You couldn't have seen this coming. As Rachel was about to leave, Bridget suddenly stopped her at the door. Detective! Whatever David was, Ashley really did love him, and she deserved a chance at happiness. Whoever did this, they took that chance away from her. At the Globe police station, Rachel met with Patrol Officer Thompson, who found the gun. Ballistics confirmed this gun was used to shoot the victim, he reported. And there are prints on it. The gun is registered in the name of David Hart. Maybe they're his. The database doesn't have them. Frowning, Rachel looked through the report. Anyone else know? Not yet. Oh, and one more thing. The Hart's neighbor, an Alan Greer, showed up. Says he saw David pull something out of the garage safe the day before the murder, but he was afraid to talk until we found the gun. Bring him in. Alan Greer turned out to be a low, middle-aged man with a nervous tic in his left eye. He nervously rubbed his shirt sleeve as he talked. I don't usually spy on my neighbors, but I was just tinkering with the hedges and had a good view of their garage. David came home looking very upset, mumbled something to himself. Then he opened the safe he keeps under the workbench and pulled out a gun. I only got a glimpse, but I'm sure it was a gun. What time was this? Around 6 p.m. after his regular workday. Did you see where he went with the gun? No, he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket and left in his car. He got back late. I was asleep. Rachel thanked Greer for the information. Now she had more grounds for a warrant, not only for the medical records, but for David Hart's own arrest. It was late evening by the time Rachel returned to the Hart house. She needed to take another look at the crime scene, try to visualize what had happened. Yellow police tape still enclosed the perimeter, but the street was quiet. Neighbors dispersed to their homes. She stepped into the silence of the house, turning on her flashlight. The setting seemed even more ominous in the darkness. Rachel walked slowly through the living room, imagining the last moments of Ashley Hart's life. Ashley had come home late from a meeting with a client who wanted to restore an antique family album. The work was painstaking, but Ashley loved returning things to their original beauty. She saw it as a metaphor for her own life. Patience and labor could transform anything into its true, beautiful form. The house was quiet and dark, with only the light of the street lamp coming through the window, casting long shadows. She turned on the light in the hallway and hung her bag on a hook, thinking of a hot bath and a cup of tea before bed. But something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air that she felt as soon as she crossed the threshold. Her intuition, honed by years of needing to be alert, told her she wasn't alone. "David!" she called, entering the living room and turning on the light. "Are you home?" The shadow against the far wall moved and a figure stepped into the room. At first, relief flooded Ashley, not the burglar. But then she saw the look on his face and the gun pointed at her. "What's going on?" Her voice shook. "What are you doing?" Fear clutched her throat with an icy hand, but she forced herself to speak calmly, judiciously. "Let's talk, okay? Whatever it is, we can work it out." She took a step forward, holding out her hand in a pleading gesture, but froze when the gun twitched in warning. "You lied to me!" Her voice was full of pain and anger that made Ashley's insides shatter. "All this time, Mike told me everything about you being a man before. How could you keep that from me?" She understood how the truth had come out. Her deepest fear materialized right in front of her, weapon in hand. "It's not a lie," she breathed out, feeling tears come to her eyes. "This is me, the real me. Everything between us is real. Our love is real." "You lied to me!" A scream of rage and pain. "I was afraid," Ashley admitted, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Afraid of losing you. I was going to tell you, I swear. Give me a chance to explain, please." She saw the hesitation, the moment of uncertainty, and for a second she allowed herself hope. Maybe love really was stronger. Maybe she could reach out, explain, make him understand. Ashley took another step forward, holding out her hand. "I love you," she said simply. It had never been a lie. The first shot struck her in the chest, knocking her backwards. The pain was deafening but strangely distant, like it was happening to someone else. She fell to her knees, still looking up, still hoping to see a glimpse of the man she loved. The second shot came in the heart area. Ashley fell on her back, the world around her becoming a blur. Her last thought was not of pain, not of anger, but of bitter irony. After all the journey to becoming herself, after all the obstacles and struggles, it was the fact that she was truly herself to the end that killed her. She hardly felt the third shot anymore. Darkness covered her, mercifully taking away the pain and fear, leaving only a silence in which her secrets no longer mattered. Rachel blinked, coming back to the present. She stood where the killer had presumably stood. 3 shots to the chest, not panic shooting, but cold-blooded, premeditated murder. Who could have done this? David, learning the shocking truth about his wife from an old friend? Or someone else, with different motives? The truth was somewhere out there among the shadows, and Rachel was determined to find it. Dawn in Globe, Arizona, always came abruptly, an instant transformation of darkness into a blinding glow. Rachel Monroe sat at her desk in the police station, surrounded by paperwork. A third cup of coffee stood nearby, already cold and almost untouched. A confirmation glowed on the computer screen in front of her. The warrant to access the Southwestern Medical Center's medical database had been approved. She wasted no time. Her fingers ran swiftly across the keyboard as she entered her credentials into the system. It was painstaking work to track the flow of information in the digital world, to find traces of who accessed certain records and when. But Rachel was patient. She'd learned from years of police work that sometimes the most important clues were hidden in the little things, the details that most people just missed. That was her strength as a detective. The ability to see what others overlooked, to connect dots that seemed unconnected. She scrutinized the access logs to Ashley Hart's medical records, noting every entry, every request. Most of them were standard, periodic checkups, routine tests, but then a series of requests made from Dr. Parker's account caught her attention. Not a single query, which could be explained by professional interest or chance, but a whole sequence of targeted searches. Rachel pitched forward, scrutinizing the timestamps. The first query had been made 2 weeks ago, a basic search for the name Ashley Hart in the general system. Then, the next day, followed by a more specific query of the Phoenix Gender Transformation Clinic database. And after that, already detailed queries for hormone therapy histories, surgical reports, and psychological evaluations. 2 hours later, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a thin smile of satisfaction. On the screen in front of her was a list of 12 requests for Ashley Hart's medical records over the past 2 weeks. Dr. Parker had methodically and persistently reviewed the entire history of Ashley's transition, from her initial consultations with the psychologists to her most recent post-operative observations. What particularly caught Rachel's attention was that he had even requested access to old medical record photos taken before the transition began. This wasn't a random discovery of information. This was a purposeful investigation, almost a hunt, and something had to have triggered it. Rachel made a note to check if Dr. Parker had had any interaction with Ashley prior to this period of active searching. She printed out the documents, folded them neatly into a folder. She now had proof that Parker had indeed accessed confidential information. Not that it was a crime per se. As a doctor, he had a right to request medical data. But if he'd disclosed that information to David, that was already a breach of professional ethics, and possibly even a felony if it led to Ashley's death. As she pondered this, there was a knock on her office door. A young officer brought new information, the results of the fingerprint examination. 100% match, he said, holding out a folder. David Hart's prints on the gun, including the trigger. No other prints. The gun is registered in his name, purchased 3 years ago. Rachel nodded, opening the folder. She wasn't surprised. Everything had pointed to David from the beginning, but now she had a definitive link between him and the murder weapon. "How's he doing?" she asked the officer, referring to Hart. "Started talking this morning. The doctor said he's out of his stupor. Lawyers already requested a meeting." Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. But before going to David, Rachel wanted to check one more thing. She dialed the phone number of Sarah Jenkins, a nurse at Parker's clinic. "Miss Sarah, I have a few more questions for you." Do you remember if Dr. Parker saw Ashley Hart at the clinic shortly before he started showing interest in her medical records? There was a brief pause, then the nurse answered. Actually, yes, about 2 weeks before the tragedy. Ashley came in for her routine test results. Dr. Rodriguez usually saw her, but he was at a conference that day, and his patients were spread out among other doctors. Ashley went to Dr. Parker. I remember because after the appointment, he looked kind of pensive, kept looking at her chart. Did he say anything? No, but, I overheard him calling someone that night. He said the numbers were weird for a woman, like it was no big deal, but something wasn't right. Rachel thanked Sarah and hung up. The picture was clearer now. Parker met Ashley as a patient. Something about her struck him as odd. And instead of respecting her identity and privacy, he'd started his own little investigation, digging up information that had nothing to do with her current medical condition. And then, armed with that information, he went to his friend David, thinking he was doing him a favor. Like many people with prejudices, he probably thought he was saving his friend from being deceived, not realizing or wanting to understand the depth and complexity of gender identity. With this new understanding, Rachel was ready to move on to the next phase of the investigation. It was time to talk to David Hart. Rachel entered the interrogation room where David had been brought in. She hardly recognized him. In just a few days, he seemed to have aged a dozen years. Sunken eyes, stubble on his chin, wrinkles that didn't seem to exist a week ago. He looked up as she entered, and Rachel saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger, but deep, all-consuming pain. Mr. Hart. She sat down across from him, placing the folder in front of her. I'm Detective Rachel Monroe. I'm investigating your wife's murder. He was silent, but something changed in his gaze. It was as if he was starting to come back from that faraway place where his mind had wandered. I know the last few days have been difficult for you, Rachel continued, watching his reaction. But I need to ask you some questions. David blinked, then nodded slowly. His hands resting on the table trembled slightly. Where were you the night of Ashley's murder? David ran his tongue over his dry lips. His voice was hoarse from the silence. I was at home. With Ashley. The confession came so easily that Rachel was even confused for a moment. You admit you were there when she died? I was there, he repeated, looking through Rachel. I ruined everything. Everything. Tell me what happened, she said softly, turning on the recorder. David took a deep breath, as if about to dive into dark water. Mike, Dr. Parker. We'd met for drinks the day before. He was weird, agitated. Said he had something to tell me as a friend. David swallowed, his apple of his eye twitching. He started from afar, asking if I'd noticed any oddities in my wife's behavior or seen any unusual medications she was taking. David clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I didn't even realize what he was getting at first. He said he'd checked her medical records, pulled out his phone, showed me some dates, doctors' names, even an old photo from her medical records. David's face contorted with the pain of the memory. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. Ashley. My Ashley. I loved her more than anything in the world. We planned children, a family. I felt cheated, betrayed. Mike kept saying that I was lucky to know the truth now, before we had kids, that he couldn't stand by and let me live a lie. His voice shook. I was furious. Not because of who she used to be, because of the lies. Because of the fact that all of our plans for the future were suddenly in question. I went home, got my gun, in case she... I don't even know what I was counting on. I was just in such a state. A tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. I didn't mean to kill her, I swear. I just wanted to show her how much it hurt. Scare her, make her feel some of the pain I felt. But when she came home, and I showed her the gun, and I saw the fear in her eyes, something clicked. All those thoughts in my head, about the lies, about how our life was a fake. I don't remember pulling the trigger. All I remember is the sound and her face. And then it was too late. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I loved her, he whispered. And I killed her because of who she once was. What did I care who she'd been in the past? She was herself, my Ashley. And He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Rachel had seen enough murderers to discern real remorse. David Hart was facing what he'd done, and it was destroying him from the inside out. "The forensics came back to us as we were questioning you," she said calmly. "Your prints on the gun match." David nodded as if he had expected that. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm so sorry." After questioning David, Rachel went straight to Dr. Parker's clinic. She didn't come alone this time. She had a uniformed officer and an arrest warrant with her. When they entered the waiting room, the nurse, Sarah Jenkins, turned pale. "He's in his office," she whispered, "with a patient." "We'll wait," Rachel replied. She didn't want to make a scene in front of outsiders. 15 minutes later, the office door opened, and an elderly woman stepped out. As soon as she left the reception area, Rachel nodded to the officer and headed for the door. Dr. Parker was sitting at his desk, making notes on a chart. When he looked up and saw Rachel with the officer, his face froze. "Dr. Michael Parker," Rachel began in an official tone, "you are under arrest on suspicion of being an accessory to the murder of Ashley Hart through breach of patient confidentiality leading to her death." Parker went pale, his hands dropping limply to the desk. I didn't mean for this to happen," he whispered. "I just thought David should know. He has a right to know." "Tell me how it all started." Rachel sat across from him, turning on the recorder. Parker ran his hand over his face, which had suddenly aged about 10 years. "Ashley came in for an appointment about 2 weeks ago. Just a routine checkup, nothing special." He shook his head. "Then, after she left, I was going over her chart and noticed her vitals were weird, and I'm a doctor, and something clicked for me." Rachel saw him struggling with shame and justification. "It's professional curiosity," I told myself. "Purely medical interest. I started searching the database, trying to find her earlier records. I found information about her transition." Parker swallowed. "I saw an old picture of her, still under her old name. And you decided to tell David about it?" There was no accusation in Rachel's voice, just cold professionalism. "David was my best friend since high school. We always talked about everything. I thought he should know that it wouldn't be fair to him to withhold such important information." Parker's voice grew quieter. I didn't realize he was capable of such a thing." "You broke your oath as a doctor," Rachel replied coldly. "You knew what you were doing." "I knew, yes," Parker admitted abruptly. "But I convinced myself that I was doing it for the good of my friend. That personal loyalty was more important than professional ethics. And now a man is dead because of me, because of my choices." He didn't resist when the officer handcuffed him. But before he was led away, he turned to Rachel. "I just wanted to protect my friend," he said quietly. "I thought, David and I have always held traditional views. Men should be men, women should be women. It's the way we were raised. I thought I was doing the right thing." Rachel looked at him with cold fury. "Because of your prejudices, a man died, Dr. Parker. A woman who didn't hurt anyone, who just wanted to live her life." They led Parker out the back door to avoid the prying eyes in the waiting room. Sarah Jenkins stood in the hallway with her hand to her mouth. "I knew he'd done something terrible," she whispered. "When he requested those files, I should have said something sooner." "You said when you could," Rachel replied, "and it helped us find the truth." That evening, Rachel sat in her apartment, looking out the window at the sunset. On the table in front of her was the folder with the Ashley Hart case, now closed. All the evidence had been collected, confessions obtained. David Hart was facing trial for murder, Dr. Parker for violating patient confidentiality and complicity. But Rachel didn't feel the satisfaction that usually came with solving a case. Only bitterness at how stupidly, how senselessly a man's life had been cut short. How a chain of decisions made out of fear, prejudice, and false loyalty had led to an irreparable tragedy. She opened the folder, taking another look at Ashley's picture. A beautiful woman with amber eyes and a soft smile. A woman who had fallen in love with a man and dreamed of a future with him. A woman who may have been afraid to reveal her secret, but did so not out of malice, but out of fear of losing what was dear to her. Rachel thought about Ashley, about her struggle to be herself, about the years of transformation, about the courage it took to go against societal norms and expectations, about the journey she'd taken to become the woman she'd always felt she was. and about how it had all been crossed out with one shot born out of prejudice and fear. She also thought of David, the man whose love and sense of betrayal had pushed him into a terrible crime, of his remorse that could not bring Ashley back to life, about how one decision made in a moment of anger ruined not only Ashley's life, but his own, and about Dr. Parker, a man who put himself as the judge of other people's lives, and how his prejudice and false sense of duty to a friend led to tragedy, about his role as a catalyst in this dark chain of events. Rachel recalled her conversation with Bridget Foster after the arrest of both men. How Ashley's best friend had cried quietly as she talked about what Ashley had gone through to become herself, her dreams and fears, her love for David that was real despite the secrets. She was going to tell him, Bridget said, wiping away tears. Had been preparing for this conversation, wanted to do it right when she was ready. She believed their love was stronger than prejudice. Maybe if she'd had a chance to tell it all herself, in her own way, things might have turned out differently. Rachel knew that technically the case was solved. The perpetrators had been found, the evidence had been collected, the truth had come out. But something about the story continued to bother her, something deeper than the simple facts of crime and punishment. Perhaps it was the realization of how easily human prejudice can lead to tragedy, or the realization that sometimes the truth coming out at the wrong time and in the wrong way can bring not liberation, but destruction, or the simple human sadness of having one less good person in the world because of someone else's intolerance. Rachel stood up and walked to the window, watching the last rays of sunlight color the sky over globe in shades of red and gold. She thought about the other Ashleys in the world, people who just wanted to live authentic lives, to be themselves, to love and be loved, about how much more needed to be done to make sure stories like this didn't happen again. She closed the folder and put it away in her briefcase. Tomorrow, she would turn in all the paperwork, and the case would officially be in the hands of the prosecutor. But today, she allowed herself to stand at the window for a little longer, thinking about what had happened, about the people whose lives had been ruined, and about what might have been if the world had been a little more accepting, a little more understanding. Outside the window, meanwhile, the sun had finally disappeared over the horizon, and Glob was plunged into darkness, colored only by the scattering of city lights. Life went on, taking with it another story of human tragedy, another reminder of how fragile happiness is, and how important it is to be able to accept others for who they are. The truth that comes out at the wrong time, and in the wrong way, can bring not liberation, but destruction. Or the simple human sadness of having one less good person in the world because of someone else's intolerance.